Hello, this is David from CarDoc Cornwall. In February 2018, my brand new spray booth from China arrived in a 20-foot container. Our first job was to unload the container. We had 1 hour to achieve it. I had no idea how much stuff was packed inside there. Without the help of my good friends, we would never have been able to do it, and to them I'm forever grateful. This series is going to be quite long because it was done over a 2-week period. I'm sure it will only be of interest to those of you who are thinking of getting a booth of this type or are just bored. I don't know why you'd be wanting to watch this, but I felt it was useful to show the full process, and hopefully somebody can be helped by it, or at least get an idea of what they're letting themselves in for if they decide to build their own booth. A neighbour kindly lent us the driver and the truck there to unload the container, and because we had to unload it so quickly, we just basically stuck everything out as wherever we could find space without really thinking about what the next step would be, which was building the floor of the booth. However, we just unpacked. By the time we'd finished, there was only one item left, and that was the floor lift weighing 300 kilos, which had been packed right at the very back of the booth of the container. Believe me, getting that thing out was an experience, but when we finally got that lump of steel out, that was the end of it, and the driver was able to go away, and then we could sit down and work out what the next steps were. The first job was to move all the stuff out of the way of the area where we were going to start constructing the floor. The blue thing in the middle is the lift, which is more or less in the position where it needs to be, which will be right in the center of the booth floor, and then the floor will be constructed around it. Everyone was having a look at the instructions. I was having a look at a video, hoping that we could come up with a solution that we all understood and get cracking. We had to identify all the floor components, so we were all running around searching them out because nobody knew what they were supposed to look like, and eventually we got some semblance of an exterior wall support section, and started constructing that and getting it aligned correctly. After taking some measurements, we got the positioning hopefully correct for the floor lift and started building the sections around it. This booth is a downdraught booth, so the floor is suspended, and you can see the long sections going in, which will be supporting the grille on which the cars will sit. There's only a 20mm gap on each side of the floor lift, so we had to get it aligned precisely in order for all of the other components to fit in around it. So it meant a lot of toing and froing until we eventually got it in the correct position. We found that the instructions weren't totally helpful. There were some mystery parts and some parts which could only go in certain positions. So it meant that we were very often installing, then uninstalling, then reinstalling until we finally got everything into the correct place. It was important that the floor layout was absolutely square, so we start measuring the diagonals to make sure that everything matches up perfectly. Of course, it wasn't square, so it took quite a while for us to finally get the thing pushed and heaved into position. We're finally tightening up all of the nuts and bolts so that we can get the thing finished that day. The last few components, which are the caps and the bars that hold the grille in place, are going in, and you can see some of the floor parts being tested for fit. There were two elements. There's a wire mesh effort which supports the filters, and on top of that a heavy steel